and welcome to my very first cosplay tutorial. In this video, I'm going to explain step by step how I made Leona from League of Legends sword. And the finished product looks like this. It's like almost as tall as I am. There are a ton of materials and tools that you're going to end up needing for this project. So I'll go ahead and put the list of materials here. I'm also going to put the link for every item in the description below because I basically bought everything that I used for this off of Amazon, so that should make it a lot easier, and I'll put the link for each item down below. The first thing that you're going to want to do is create a stencil or an outline of the entire sword. And the easiest way that I have found to do that is to use a site called rasterbaiter.net. It's a really great site that allows you to print out a very, very large image instead of having to go to like a Kinko's or somewhere where you could print out a large photo like this. It allows you to utilize just a regular at-home printer, and it prints out the entire thing in sheets. I already found a pre-made image of Leona's sword on like Google Images, and I just uploaded it to rasterbaiter.com and printed it out from there. And then I just cut it out and I taped everything together. Once I had my outline or my stencil for the sword, I took that and I laid it on top of a long roll of foam. Using a chalk pencil, I traced the stencil onto the foam. What you might also find helpful when you're tracing the stencil onto the foam is you can use like pins, like sewing pins, to pin the stencil onto the foam. That way it's not like moving all over the place while you're trying to trace it. After tracing it, I cut out the shape of the sword with an Exacto knife. So I cut and traced this part onto the piece of foam 3 times, this part 2 times, and this part 2 times as well, because the blade is going to be a little bit thinner than the handle. Here I am tracing the crossguard portion of the sword onto 1/4 inch foam, but I ended up redoing it and tracing it onto 1/2 inch foam later. In order for the sword to have stability, you need to have something on the inside to keep it upright, otherwise it's foam, so it would just like droop over, and that's not what you want. So what I used was a long wooden stick. This I actually did buy from, I think it was like Home Depot, but you could probably find it at any local home improvement store. For the structure of this portion right here, I had to use something else, but we're gonna get to that later on in the video. Once I had the shape of the wooden stick traced onto the foam, I went ahead and took a Dremel and I Dremelled a little space for the wooden stick. Do yourself a favor, and while you're using the Dremel on foam, please wear a mask of some sort and goggles, because there's going to be little foam particles flying everywhere and they're going to get in your eyes and you're going to breathe them in. That's not going to be good. Just protect your face while you're Dremeling things so that you don't get foam all up in your face. So I had to cut the stick to fit in this portion and then a piece in the handle. I used Barge Cement to glue together all the foam pieces. I went ahead and glued the 2 pieces of foam for the blade together with the wooden stick inside, and then I did the same thing for the handle as well. With Barge Cement, it works best when you apply one layer, let that dry so the foam can kind of soak that up, and then apply a second layer as well, and then let that dry for a few minutes. That way it becomes really sticky and it's easier to bond the 2 pieces of foam together. Once I had the blade and the handle all nice and glued together, I went ahead and took the Dremel again and just started Dremeling the edges of the sword. As you can see, I also ended up drawing lines for reference, so I knew how far in I needed to Dremel the sword, and also where the details were going to fit onto the sword later on. And then I did the same thing for the handle as well. I also used the Dremel to smooth out any jagged pieces of foam or anything that wasn't completely flush, and I just kind of Dremeled everything out to make it more smooth. I think this part is called the cross guard. I don't know. Whatever this part is called, I went ahead and did the same thing. I took each piece separately and began Dremeling the sides just to make everything kind of a bit more pointed. Once I was done Dremeling, I took some sandpaper and I sanded everything out just to make it a bit more smooth. And I repeated that process for the handle and the cross guard. Once everything was Dremeled and sanded, I went ahead and took a heat gun and I heat sealed each part as well. Heat sealing the foam helps close the cells of the foam, and it basically just creates a smoother surface. So unfortunately there is a hole in the middle of Leona's sword, and that's the reason why I had to cut the wooden stick into two pieces, because obviously you wouldn't want to see it like running through here. But I had to find another way to give this part structure. So I had the wooden stick in here and in the blade, but in here I needed something that was circular and that I could attach to the two pieces of wood that were in the blade and in the handle. There's a lot of different ways that you could probably do this. The way that I did it, I used Instamorph. The bag that you can see I have here is the larger 32-ounce size, but you can buy a much smaller and cheaper, I believe 6-ounce size from Amazon as well, since you're not going to be using the entire thing. So what you do is you heat up water, the directions say to 150 degrees, and then you pour the Instamorph into the water. Once the little plastic pellets have heated up enough, they will clump up into a little ball, and then you can remove that from the water with like tongs. It's gonna be pretty hot when you take it out, so just be careful. You can basically mold it to like whatever shape you want, and then once it cools down, which doesn't take very long, it takes like maybe 30 minutes. It doesn't take very long. It cools down really quickly, and then it solidifies to like really solid plastic. So what I did is I just like rolled it out to like a long thin strip, and then I shaped it into a circle that was the appropriate size and shape for the circle right here. And it goes from being like translucent or clear while it's heated and moldable to being a pretty opaque and white plastic. While the plastic was still clear and moldable, I made a little groove where the two pieces of wood that stuck out from the handle and the blade could fit in, so that when I glued it all together, it would just kind of fit nice and snug. So after that, I took the two pieces that were going to make up the crossguard and I traced the plastic circle that I made, and I kind of cut out a little groove for the plastic circle to fit inside the crossguard. I also ended up using a Dremel, and I Dremeled the groove a little more, and the two pieces would fit together pretty seamlessly. So in order to attach the plastic circle and the two wooden sticks that made up the structure, I used Epoxy Putty. Basically, this stuff is like Play-Doh, but when it dries, it becomes like steel. It's what I used to cement these three pieces together. I also made sure I Dremmeled a little groove for a place where the epoxy putty could fit. You want to make sure that you're wearing gloves while you're handling it because you don't want to get this stuff on your hands. Like, cut a piece of it off. Ah! And then you're just gonna have this. So you're gonna want to mix these two layers together, the like white or grayish one and then like dark gray one. You're gonna want to mix them together. Okay, so it's gonna look, oh, this is really not mixed up very well. Okay, so it's gonna look a little bit like this. So now it's just like a one solid gray color. And it's still, at this point, it's still moldable. I molded it around the plastic circle. The next step was just to use Barge Cement to glue all of the pieces together. I took the Dremel again and I cleared up. There were a lot of like uneven, you can still kind of see it because I didn't fix it, pieces of foam from these two pieces here that were stuck together. So at this point, the next thing to do would be gluing on these details. I went ahead and cut them out from the original stencil. I used the 1/4 inch foam for the portion that went on the blade, and then I later on ended up using the 2mm foam for the details on the handle. Everything has been put together. All three pieces have been assembled. Everything has been Dremmeled, sanded, and heat sealed all over. So before we start the painting process, went ahead and covered the entire sword in a few layers of Plastidip. So I went outside, I went ahead and sprayed the entire thing with Plastidip, and I put quite a few layers on, so it doesn't take very long for it to dry. So I would spray it, let it dry, go back, spray it again, and I repeated that process probably 4 times or so. The next thing to do is start the painting process. So as far as paint goes, I used Angelus, specifically their leather paint. The colors that I used for this were the metallic gold, and then I also used purple, red, and white, and I used a mixture of these three to create the, I guess it's purple, but it's like a pinkish purple. It's like a, I don't know. But I used these three to make that color. This paint is pretty thin, so you do have to end up putting on quite a few layers, letting it dry after each layer as well. If you want, you can also paint in a few of the details on her sword, like so here. Once that's done, you're pretty much all finished. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you want to continue following my progress, I am working on an entire Leona cosplay. I am going to be working on her shield next. If you want to keep up on my progress with that, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. But until then, see you next time.